Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Evolution of Data Controls in the Era of Generative AI. My name is Eric Andrews, and I'll be moderator for today's session. As you all know, we've seen a rapid rise in generative AI tools such as ChatGPT and Bard, and this has really ushered in a whole bunch of promises in terms of unique and limitless business opportunities, but also raises a bunch of concerns from a privacy and governance perspective. And that's what we'll explore today. So we're thrilled to have with us Enza Iannopollo from Forrester. She's a principal analyst at Forrester. She's recently just authored some new research, Privacy Primer on Generative AI Governance, which is very relevant to today's conversation. Along with her, we have Rehan Jalil, CEO of Securiti. Securiti is a leader in unified data controls, which helps enable essentially a data command center that helps provide comprehensive intelligence and automated controls around your data in hybrid and multi-cloud. So just a few housekeeping items before we get going. If you look on your screen, you'll see a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So feel free throughout the conversation to ask any questions, and we'll collect those, and we'll leave some time at the end of the discussion to address questions. The way the presentation will work, we'll start with some comments from Enza, and she'll share some of her thoughts, and we'll follow that up with some comments from Rehan, and then we'll go into a Q&A. So with that, I would like to go ahead and pass the ball over to Enza. And Enza, perhaps you can help us understand a little bit more about what's happening in the area of privacy and governance of generative AI.
Thank you for having me, and I'll promise I'll do my best with that. I also want to take an opportunity to thank everybody who is on the line for this webinar today. And what a topic, right? As I was preparing this presentation, I went through some of the data that we have, but also with the many conversations with my clients, I keep thinking about the cheetah. Cheetah is the fastest animal on land. And when I think about the explosion, specifically of generative AI tooling, ChatGPT probably, I think has been named one of the, probably the fastest consumer app adopted ever. And also from enterprise clients. We see all the time, everyday discussions about what they are already doing, and also the potential and the possibility for expanding the adoption and the use of generative AI tooling. So it has been extremely fast when you think about the adoption and the interest in the market for generative AI tooling. And then I have to think about governance. Because, you know, there is the aspect of what we can do and the potential of the technology, but there is also the aspect, how do we make sure that we understand the risks, that we are taking them under control, that we do have measures in place to ensure that the technology does what we want it to do. And when I think about the governance, I do think a little bit like the tortoise. We are, you know, governance people, privacy people. We take our time sometimes, and we like to go slow, but maybe this time we will have to speed up at some point. But just apart from my reference to the different animals there, I want to just spend some time to think about the definition of AI governance. I think it's always very good to bring us all on the same page. And we have defined AI at Forrester as the AI governance as the practices that business leaders adopt to incorporate purpose, culture, action, and assessment to ensure AI delivers desired business outcomes, is responsibly used, and complies with applicable regulations. So it's a mix of the compliance piece, of course, but also I love the reference to the culture and the purpose that is so dear to us in the privacy world, especially. And I like to say that privacy and AI governance is just part of the same ecosystem. I know there has been a lot of discussion about the role of privacy and privacy risk mitigation in the context of AI and generative AI. And I do think that, you know, governance for AI systems is going to be broader than privacy. I firmly believe that privacy still is this very important building block of our generative AI governance, and it deals with some of the most important risks, some of the most relevant risks that the technology can create. And this is not news to many of the companies that are in fact investing already in AI and generative AI. This is data that we have from Forrester. I'd like to share with you. We have asked companies that are using artificial intelligence technologies to tell us about the biggest challenges that their organization went through using the technology. You can see there the number one is very much around the privacy concerns with the use of AI to mine customer insights. It makes sense because, of course, in these AI systems, especially generative AI systems, we know that technology learns. Every time that is exposed to data, there is this continuous learning process. It also means that we create risks that might feel unknown, might be unknown. And fundamentally, what I ask my clients to think about is what is going to happen to the personal information that you are using to refine a model, that you are using as the surface for that model. What is going to happen to that data? We don't really have answers to these questions. And so there are still many unknowns, especially when it comes to personal information. And I think it's important that we really think about those privacy elements. And the risks are real. I know there is plenty of stories out there. I just picked some that I thought were particularly relevant here. The investigation by the FTC around the potential of creating harm to people by using false information. There is also a letter. I don't know if any of you on the line have seen that. The FTC is sending a letter with to OpenAI and really asking very specific questions around some of the risk elements and the mitigation elements of these LLMs, the large language models. And there is a lot of reference there to personal information. There is something that I particularly appreciated there in the fact that the FTC is asking about personal data that is not personal in nature, but might become personal in the moment it actually is part of a training model. So those dependency and the context that is creating sensitive risk or personal risks beyond the specific data point is just a very different way of thinking about risk from a privacy perspective and understanding that. So I think this case was definitely very, very interesting. And then there are a number of studies that have been already carried out that actually are showing that fraud powered by Gen AI and AI and misinformation is definitely becoming much more powerful, much more difficult to detect, and can create a lot of issues. And then appreciate this other campaign. I don't know if any of you have seen this. This is from Deutsche Telekom, and they have created a campaign in which a child talks to their parents, saying, just with a photo that you might be posting on social media, we know a lot of the system actually are scraping websites to find information, images, data. And so the story of this child talking to their parents and showing with a little image and maybe just a little snippet of the voice of a child, they can really create, someone that is ill-intentioned with AI and Gen AI can really create enormous risks in terms of identity fraud and identity theft. So it was very powerful. There is a whole little movie there. Very powerful to explain how the technology can really create significant risks for now and for the future. And so what are we doing? What are the governance and privacy people doing? Well, first of all, if you look around all the material that is already available from a privacy risk management perspective, and even broader from a governance perspective, you will notice that privacy is a fundamental part of all these different frameworks. For example, this is the European one of 2019, the ethic guidelines for trustworthy AI, where the general data protection regulation, the GDPR, and the references to privacy are extremely robust in that set of guidelines, reminding organizations that when personal identifiable information is involved, all we know about the management of it has to come into place, even when we are dealing with generative AI or AI systems. Very strong reference to privacy also for this framework that was put forward by the Singapore government as a model AI governance framework as well. The NIST framework, the AI risk management framework, has privacy and privacy enhancing techniques as a foundation of the framework itself. And then, of course, one of the latest, this is the European AI Act, the very first centralized piece of regulation around AI and Gen AI that, again, contain very strong references to privacy. So whatever is the framework you're looking at to kind of manage the risk of AI and generative AI systems, privacy is going to be this very foundational pillar of the approach. And privacy regulators have been already active. We have, of course, my fellow Italian regulator, the Garante, which was one of the first one to go, and I say it was a bold move that they said, hey, ChatGPT, if you don't comply with these fundamental privacy requirements, you cannot actually operate in our country. Now, we can open a discussion whether in 20 days the request of the regulator was fully achieved or not, but certainly the regulator was happy enough to then allow that technology to operate back in Italy. But what is interesting were actually the demands, and because they were really fundamental privacy principles: transparency, consent for minors, the ability of data subjects to go back and say, hey, I want to know which data you are collecting about me. I know which data you have about me. So it was interesting to see these very foundational privacy principles being called out by the Garante in the context of generative AI systems. And then France, if you haven't looked at the website of the CNIL, the Data Protection Authority in France, they are building a whole set of assets to help organizations deal with the governance of Gen AI and AI with a specific reference to privacy. So there is a lot there. The European Data Protection Board are also put together even a task force to go through and do some analysis around the risk, and then start to produce templates and assessments and assets that organizations can use to refine their approach to privacy and AI and Gen AI. And then Canada, that's another regulator that is working on producing templates and assets for organization. And then here it comes the news. For me, I live in the UK, so I follow closely the action of the UK data protection regulator, the ICO. I have been following the discussion about AI regulation in the UK, and I have to admit I was somehow surprised that it potentially the ICO, the data protection regulator in the UK, might become the lead regulator for AI in the UK. So really bringing privacy in a driving seat for the implementation and enforcement of existing requirements for AI governance. So from a privacy perspective, there is really a lot going on and a lot of resources that are available and will be available in the future. And then I look at the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, that contains some very fundamental requirements that can be applied in the context of the decision of the Garante, the Italian regulator. I did mention some basic privacy requirements. I mentioned transparency, consent, data subject rights. But the cases, the companies that now you see here, they, especially Ola and Uber, by the way, very similar business, they run this digital taxi service. Uber, I'm sure everybody knows, and Ola does exactly the same type of business. They were some of the first companies that in Europe have seen courts enforce Article 22 and Article 15 of the GDPR on them. The Article 22 is the article about the fully automated decision making. And Article 15 is around what some have called the combination of Article 22 and 15, really this right to an explanation of AI-driven decisions. So fundamentally, courts in Europe, and this was the first time that they applied Article 22 this way, have considered the cases that fundamentally these two companies were using fully automated decision-making using AI to take decisions that had to do, for example, with the matching of the drivers and the customers, or the drivers earning profits, and the way tips were given to different drivers. All these decisions that had that had legal or similarly impactful similar impacts on the taxi drivers, they were all made through the technology, through algorithm and AI. And so the courts have asked both Ola and Uber to explain, to give visibility around the logic of those decisions. So providing especially in the case of Ola, providing the drivers with the opportunity to look inside those algorithms and start to understand how this decision is made, which are the variables that were considered. And then in the UK, the case of Uber, actually to provide visibility into the personal information that the algorithm used to make a certain decision. So very first case in which we start to see how the application of Article 22 goes very much into the direction of that explainability of algorithm and AI, and how the importance of understanding which kind of personal information are used in making these decisions. So I think just a starting point, we are going to see more of these type of cases moving forward. And then, of course, I couldn't talk about AI and generative AI governance without making a reference to Europe and what is going on here in terms of the new regulation that is coming out. I did mention the AI Act, and I said there is very strong reference to privacy there. There are also very strong reference to risk-based, use case-driven way of looking at AI. But there is more to it. There is a new regulation around the liability framework and the safety legislation, and then a new set of standards and guidelines that the European Union and the member states are working on. And of course, the impacts then will also be in consumer protection regulation, privacy with the GDPR, sector-specific regulation, and intellectual property. So a very broad range of rules and regulations that are either being created for AI, like the AI Act, or being updated to more specifically deal with the specific of the AI use cases and the different risks that we are looking for. So there is plenty there from, again, privacy and a regulatory perspective. So what do we do? Now that there is all of this going on, our little turtle has to speed up. And what I wanted to do with the research that Eric mentioned at the beginning that I just published was just a way to explore our privacy toolkit, what we know as privacy professionals we usually have at our disposal, and really think about how do we apply the toolkits that we have to the context of generative AI governance, these new risks that are created, and also how do we expand? How do we identify the opportunity for new tools, new processes, new approaches that really can serve for the challenges that we see facing? So the very first part of the research is looking into the definition of a risk surface. I see a lot of my organizations out there, a lot of my clients are really starting to think about where is personal data in these kind of process. And a lot of them focus only on the training model, so the LLMs, and they are like really focused on the personal data risk must be just with the training model. Or sometimes they're really thinking about the output, what is actually generated as a statement or in different formats, but what is generated by the generative AI app as kind of the surface for risk. But the reality is that personal data or personal insights might be present across these three different steps. It might be the case for the, again, input. Think about the corporate data that you might be using for refining or fine-tuning a model, an LLM that you get from a third party. But also sometimes I've seen some organization defining a data surface for the applicability of the generative AI app. And that is important that moment when you are feeding data into that system, that you are clear on, do we have personal data in here? Do we have sensitive data in here? And if yes, where are the safeguards that we have to put in place? But that is a very first step. Then there is the LLM model itself, the training model. And this is really a matter of that third-party risk procedure in which you start to ask the questions. Where are the sources? A little bit at the letter that the FTC put together, but really asking about the sources of the data, the type of data, where was personal data, how that personal data behaves within those training models. And then, of course, the output. And again, very interesting reference to the fact, and there is actually a European court decisions around sensitive insights. The idea that sometimes you are going to create sensitive insight by inferring those insights from other information. Now, that information might not be personal in nature, but you will start learning things.